Okay, so this is the turn of the century American 36-inch bandsaw, or 38-inch actually, that Dad and I restored, mostly me. Most of you probably aren't going to listen for the restoration details, so we're just going to run it first. Here's the start button and the unguarded wheel. Go ahead.
Bandsaw is probably 100 or 110 years old, made around 1900 or 1910. I bought it in around 1994, about the time, actually I bought it before, I think 1994, before Brennen was born.
That's me.
And you know, it sat here for 18 to 19 years, and Brennen finally, you know, decided to restore it, was old enough to take it on. He did a super job, sandblasted it, took it down to the bare frame, painted everything, painted pinstriping, and highlighted all the lettering. So it's been a long time in the shop, but you know, only started running now. American. Originally came from the Norfolk shipyards.
Yeah, there's a brass tag on the back here. Hope it shows up. Yeah, you can see that Bureau of Ordnance. So it was involved in munitions somehow. I don't know where a woodworking bandsaw fits into that, but it was there. When we got it, it was using the V-belt, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, but obviously it was originally flat belt. The pulley came with it, both the big one and the little one. So we just used, what is it, baler belt. It's rubber with like fiberglass reinforcement, because don't know where we would have found leather. This motor is not original. It's a 3-horse one from somewhere. From Reynolds.
Can plant.
Dad got it from the can plant. It has 2 shafts. That one's just kind of hanging out, but it's the only one we had for the correct power and RPM. So we just went ahead and used it. Didn't paint it or anything. It looks pretty ugly, but whatever. Let's see, what else did we do? We re-poured some of the bearings, some of the Babbitt metal bearings. I think we did
more than once.
Yeah, it was the first time we did that, so it was a learning process. I splashed a little bit of it on myself and the saw, so I got to pick that off for a while. This dust collector system, originally, here, let me get around to the front. It only had one hole for dust collection. That was this one down at the bottom, and that probably worked just fine. I don't know why, but somewhere along the way they made this wooden chute kind of thing to go around the blade and direct it into this very poorly cut hole. You just drilled into it a bunch of times and then popped it out. And made this funny shaped galvanized sheet metal thing to collect the dust out of. Didn't want to mess around with welding a plug into this cast iron hole, so we just kind of left that. There was another one here, I'm not even sure what for. Just put a piece of wood over it.
You need to stop and start another one.
Okay, so both wheels are actually original paint. There is a surprising amount of original paint actually on it when we started. Originally it was black, but then somebody painted over it with that ugly green color. That's some of the wood that went around the dust collection. But yeah, that had to go because that was disgusting. So we brought it back to black. We actually had trouble getting the original black paint off to redo it because it was still underneath. It was really goopy, probably full of lead. But we got it down to either bare metal or some paint and redid the whole thing. Encased the entire saw in plastic and stapled it to the ceiling here. You can see the marks where the paint was, actually, the overspray. And then I went back and did some of these red details. That probably was not there originally. I don't think it was nice enough of a saw in the day to have actually gotten any pinstriping or detail, but I put it on there because it looks cool.
Wasn't old enough. Late 1800s, it would have been much fancier with curved spokes and more pinstriping, but they got more utilitarian with the castings in after 1900.
Yeah, everything is cast iron on this. It's incredibly heavy. These doors are cast iron. That seems completely unnecessary, but back in the day it was probably the easiest thing to do. We have one new and one old guide on it. This isn't actually, I didn't just take that off, but it's really dark on the underside, so this is pretty much the same thing. That's the original top guide that we took off. It's kind of a funny arrangement. The blade goes through these two little chunks of brass and skates kind of diagonally on that bearing wheel. That was a little primitive for us. So Dad got that new, really expensive guide a long time ago to use on the top. It's a little more accurate. So, like a lot of old saws, this Guidepost is actually really heavy because it's a solid, like 1.5 inch square bar of steel. So it has a counterweight for when you raise and lower that. It's still pretty hard to move, especially holding a phone in one hand. You can see the counterweight going down there. I made this little pulley thing just because there's a curve in the casting here, and previously this cable would scrape on the casting, and since we painted it all nice, I didn't want that to happen anymore. So made this little pulley. It's just kind of stuck in place by the tension of the cable. I didn't even attach that. Okay, this brass light was probably not original, but it's brass, and I like brass, so I left it, and it actually does a pretty good job of lighting up the where the blade enters the wood, if this rip fence wasn't here anyway. But you can see that was kind of stuck on in a hurry by somebody at some point. I actually had to raise it up from its original mounting points using these little steel things because it was down low and covering up this cast-in American and some of the tags. And just for aesthetic purposes, I raised it up a little bit. That electrical box is actually original paint too, as far as we can tell. It's just a nasty old black. Yeah. This table took ages to get cleaned up to the point you see it now. It's not exactly a mirror finish. That's mostly because I didn't want to put the time into it. Because, you see, this is like I think it's 3 feet square table. It's all one giant piece of cast iron. And if I did polish it much more, you wouldn't be able to see these shaper marks. And I thought that was pretty cool. You don't see anything that's milled with a shaper anymore, really. You can kind of see these straight lines going all the way across it. And that would have been lost if I'd polished it much more, so I just kind of left it like this. It's good enough. Waxed it up. It's not going to get any worse.
The saw has this auxiliary table that fills in between the back of the column and the tilting tabletop. Brings it more or less level, gives you a little bit more room for your work pieces. And there's this scallop in the door and this machined guide here. And it took me a long time to figure out what those were, but originally this machine was developed with line shafts and flat belts, and it did have an auxiliary electric motor mount, but half the buyers or most of the buyers of this machine in 1910 would have been driving this off of a line shaft. And so when you close this door, what this had was a round bar with a handle on it protruding through the door, and then forks that came down on either side of the flat belt. And then that was the way to start and stop the saw. You push the forks, and that guides the flat belt off of what's called a loose pulley, which had bearings, and it rotated freely without driving the saw to the fast pulley. And fast meaning it was fixed to the lower bandsaw wheel. So you push that lever, and those slide axially in these 3/4 inch round guide holes, and it starts and stops the saw when you have a flat belt drive. We have a start stop switch here because we have the electric option, but just thought you might find that interesting.